What if I told you that the richest people alive today barely lift a finger in traditional work? They simply own pieces of the economy that generate money while they sleep, and that this ownership model has created a permanent class divide, where one group compounds wealth effortlessly, while everyone else trades their limited time and energy just to survive. Yeah, you heard that right. The phrase, "the rich do not work, they own," captures a fundamental transformation in modern capitalism, and it explains why the gap between the top and everyone else keeps widening year after year, no matter how hard the average person hustles. If you have ever wondered why your salary never seems to keep up, while billionaires add hundreds of millions to their net worth without breaking a sweat, then you're about to get the full, unfiltered breakdown that explains exactly how this system works. Today, we are ripping open why the rich do not work, they own, the sarcastic truth about how ownership of productive assets has replaced wage labor as the main engine of sustained wealth, the clear class asymmetry that ties one group's prosperity to capital markets, while the other's is tied to selling labor in increasingly competitive markets, and the deeper reason this division has become the central axis of contemporary class dynamics. Stick with me until the very last word, because the historical shift since the 1980s, the data on wage stagnation versus asset returns, the mechanics of dividends, rents, and capital gains, and the brutal reality that this is not personal greed alone but a structural divergence in life, trajectories will leave you equal parts furious and finally clear-eyed about why the game feels rigged. If you are tired of hearing that hard work alone is enough while the real money flows to owners, not workers, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications so you never miss these deep dives, and drop a comment below telling me whether you have felt this asymmetry in your own career, or if this explanation has you rethinking what success actually looks like in 2026. I read every single comment, and we are building this conversation together as a community that demands the real story behind the headlines. Welcome to Money's Hidden Past. Rich people lied, we fact-checked. Let us begin with the quiet revolution that took place in the 1980s, because that is when the rules of the game were quietly rewritten. In advanced economies, the cultural and legal duty of corporations became maximizing shareholder value above all else. Labor was reclassified as a variable cost to be minimized, not a partner to be rewarded. This shareholder primacy era turned equities, real estate, intellectual property, private equity stakes, and financial instruments into the dominant engines of wealth creation. These assets generate returns through dividends, capital gains, rents, and interest that scale independently of personal effort. A single stock portfolio or real estate holding can produce millions in passive income while the owner sleeps, travels, or pursues hobbies. The owner does not clock in, does not manage day-to-day operations, and does not trade hours for dollars. The asset works for them. This creates a clear class asymmetry. Those who must sell their labor for income operate under the strict constraint of time and physical capacity. There are only 24 hours in a day, and a human body can only produce so much output before it needs rest. Those who own sufficient capital are liberated from this constraint. Their income compounds through ownership rather than through hours worked. Over generations, this mechanism concentrates wealth and power among a rentier class, whose economic position derives from control of assets rather than from productive contribution in the traditional sense. The data on this transformation is unambiguous and spans decades of economic research. From the 1980s onward, the share of national income going to capital owners rather than labor has risen steadily in almost every advanced economy. Studies from the Economic Policy Institute and the International Monetary Fund show that labor's share of income in the United States fell from roughly 65% in the 1970s to around 58% by the 2000s, and it has remained suppressed ever since. Meanwhile, returns to capital through dividends, buybacks, and asset appreciation have exploded. The top 1% of households now capture more than 20% of total income, and an even larger share of wealth, largely because their income comes from ownership rather than wages. The Forbes list of the world's billionaires is dominated by people whose fortunes stem from equity stakes in companies they founded or inherited, real estate empires, or investment portfolios. These individuals do not work in the sense of trading time for money. They own the companies, the buildings, and the financial instruments that generate cash flow. A tech founder who owns a large stake in a public company can see his net worth increase by hundreds of millions in a single day when the stock rises, without ever stepping into an office. A real estate investor collects rent checks every month while the property manager handles the day-to-day work. This is not laziness, it is the logical outcome of a system that rewards capital far more generously than labor. The sarcastic truth that polite conversation rarely admits is that this asymmetry is not an accident or a failure of the market. It is the market working exactly as redesigned in the late 20th century. When profits rise, the gains flow overwhelmingly to executives and shareholders through stock-based compensation, massive share buybacks, and dividends. When costs must be cut, the first target is always headcount because employees are an expense line item, while capital is an asset to be protected. The chief executive officer, who announces thousands of layoffs while the stock price jumps, is not failing. By the metrics that now govern corporate America, he is succeeding brilliantly. Executive pay packages are explicitly tied to share price performance, not to employee welfare or long-term stability. Meanwhile, the average worker's wages have stagnated relative to productivity gains for decades. The result is a predictable asymmetry. Executives and owners capture the upside. Employees absorb the downside. This division has become the central axis of contemporary class dynamics. One group's prosperity is tied to the performance of capital markets. The other group's is tied to the sale of labor in increasingly competitive markets where automation, globalization, and cost cutting constantly pressure wages. Consider the real-world mechanics that make this possible. Equities pay dividends and appreciate in value. Real estate generates rental income and long-term capital gains. Intellectual property produces royalties. Private equity stakes deliver carried interest and exit proceeds. Financial instruments, such as bonds and derivatives, yield interest and trading profits. All of these returns scale with the size of the asset base rather than with the owner's personal effort. A billionaire with a diversified portfolio can earn tens of millions per year in passive income while spending his days on philanthropy, travel, or leisure. The average worker, meanwhile, must show up every day, trade hours for dollars, and hope that raises keep pace with inflation and living costs. Over time, this creates a structural divergence in life trajectories. The owner class benefits from compounding. The labor class fights against time decay. The owner can lose a job or retire early without financial catastrophe because the assets continue working. The worker who loses a job often faces immediate hardship because there is no asset base generating income in the background. This is not merely inequality of outcome. It is a divergence in the fundamental nature of economic security and freedom. The energetic reality that makes this system so durable is that it is defended in the language of merit and market efficiency. Proponents argue that rewarding capital encourages innovation and risk-taking that ultimately benefits everyone through new jobs and products. There is truth in that argument. Venture capital and equity markets have funded technologies that raise living standards dramatically. The problem is that the rewards have become so concentrated that the broader society no longer shares proportionally in the gains. Productivity has risen for decades, yet the typical worker's compensation has not kept pace because the gains flow to ownership rather than labor. The modern corporation has become an extraction machine optimized for capital, not for people. The rich do not work, they own, and that ownership liberates them from the constraints that still bind everyone else. This is the quiet arithmetic that explains why the gap keeps widening even in periods of strong economic growth. The deeper structural point is that this model rewards those who already have capital far more than those who must earn it through labor. A young person born into wealth can receive trust funds or family investments that compound for decades before they ever enter the workforce. A person born without that advantage must sell labor for decades just to accumulate enough to begin investing meaningfully. The head start compounds into an insurmountable lead. Over generations, this mechanism concentrates wealth and power among a rentier class whose economic position derives from control of assets rather than from productive contribution in the traditional sense. The result is not class warfare in the old revolutionary sense. It is a structural divergence in life trajectories that feels like class warfare to those on the losing side of the equation. The mature recognition in 2026 is that this asymmetry is the central axis of contemporary class dynamics. The rich do not work, they own, because ownership has become the dominant path to sustained wealth in advanced economies. Those who must sell their labor operate under the constraint of time and physical capacity. Those who own sufficient capital are liberated from this constraint. Their income compounds through ownership rather than through hours worked. Understanding this reality does not require anger or resentment. It requires clear-eyed recognition of how the system actually functions. The solution lies in expanding access to ownership, broadening participation in capital markets, and creating policies that reward productive contribution rather than simply protecting existing asset holders. Until then, the phrase, "the rich do not work, they own," will continue to describe the fundamental transformation in modern capitalism and the quiet mechanism that separates the owners from everyone else. If this deep dive into why the rich do not work, they own, and the fundamental transformation that has made ownership the dominant path to wealth, fired you up about seeing the real mechanics behind class dynamics in 2026, then do me a favor right now. Smash that like button to let the algorithm know this conversation matters. Share this video with every friend and family member who needs to understand how the game is actually played. And let us keep exposing what they do not want you to see. I will catch you in the next one where we break down the next hidden chapter in how wealth and power flow in the modern economy. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember that in the current system, ownership is the ultimate advantage and labor is the cost that makes it possible.